Welcome to the Procurement Software Podcast, where we aim to educate and inspire you about how technology is changing and shaping our profession. The truth is, there's never been a more exciting time to be in procurement, but only if you're one of those organizations that's embracing the change and driving new developments. And this podcast is all about giving you the tools to help you get there. So buckle up and let's get right into this week's show. Yes, very warm welcome to another episode of the Procurement Software Podcast. We are the official podcast of procurementsoftware.site, where you can search, filter, and select over 440 procurement tech vendors all in one app, completely free of charge. And you can get that in less time than it takes you to boil an egg, your short list of tech providers to talk to in just a few mouse strokes. Today on this week's episode, we're going to be digging into the age-old topic of how do you ensure a successful implementation of procurement tech. And I will openly hold my hands up and say I know absolutely nothing about implementing procurement technology because I've never done it myself as a practitioner. So with these types of discussions, it's always great to bring consultants on to talk about this who play in this space day in, day out. And so my guest today is Oliver Jones from UK-based procurement consultancy Procure4. Oliver, welcome.
Thanks, James. Good to see you again. Thank you for the intro. I'm now a little bit hungrier. Now you've said egg.
Always interesting talking to you, Oliver, because Procure4 is very much engaged in that mid-market space. So whereas a lot of consultancies implement the big boys, you don't, and you make a point of being solution agnostic. So I really like that because it gives you a wider perspective and it gives you a bit more freedom to say what you think without being bound by any marketing spiel of a particular vendor or having to cover up some of their weaknesses. So what are your thoughts, before we dig in, what are your thoughts generally on where the market's at right now?
Yeah, it's a good point. Technology is an aspect of what we do. Obviously, we do a lot of different procurement, supply chain, consulting, sort of globally actually as well, not just the UK, but out of the UK hub. But technology is an interesting position. I think we saw some stats at a conference last year about just how many companies have entered the market. And yes, some of them will be end-to-end or enterprise, as you might say, and some will be more modular or focus on a specific thing. But there's just so much. And there's a lot of competition, and that just creates a lot of complexity and creates quite a challenge for potential clients to assess, which solution to go down. And that's where they sort of need our support, not just at the front end, which I think where you get involved as well, but just throughout the journey and making a success of it, really. Again, with it being mid-market, as you say, it can appeal to the smaller businesses all the way up to the big ones. But I think we offer value to the client because we are agnostic. Okay, fair enough. That means that they choose a certain solution, then a certain partner might be better at implementing it because of their experience. But that assumes they've already selected that solution, doesn't it, really? So, yeah, we like it. It gives us options. And we definitely bring that people and process piece to the whole technology implementation.
And just to give the audience a bit of a flavour of what you do, what industry sectors are you strongest in, just so as we can maybe bring this to life with a few examples?
Yeah, no problem. So, obviously, when you're talking about addressing spend, particularly things like indirect spend, for example, it's cross-sector, isn't it? Because the commonality. But when it comes down to other things and just where we've had real success, and therefore naturally we get referred within sectors because leaders move within sectors typically.
Yeah,
hospitality and leisure, food manufacturing, so food and drink in particular. But again, commonality across all of manufacturing there, to be honest. Retail, healthcare, and any kind of care, actually, because in truth, we've also looked at childcare as well, childcare clients. We've worked for. So definitely multi-sector, but spent a significant amount of time in those. We've done a bit of local government and NHS as well, although we're mostly private sector. So we'll always be honest about where our skills and experience lie. When it comes down to technology, I guess public to private might have a difference, will have a difference. But I think within private, technology might not be as sector bound, other than I would say maybe PQQ, sort of your front end vendor assurance type stuff, because naturally a lot of those vendors might be unique to a sector and already set up on a technology. So maybe there's a bit of sector nuance there. But I think for the most part, I think technology can be spread wider. But yeah, thanks for asking. We've got a lot of experience in those sectors I've just mentioned.
Cool. So that's a good backdrop because the first thing that I wanted to touch on, we want to explore around more holistically, how can you generate return on investment and adoption of procurement tech? So how would you define ROI in a broader sense?
Yeah, good question. So I think this is really about what do clients value and what is the need that they're trying to address. So in regulated sectors, particularly finance, slightly different regulators, obviously. But in finance, their major focus is on risk and third-party risks. So what they're looking for is, a system really that should be reporting, providing insight, data, improving supply performance, increasing transparency and visibility. But the ultimate point from a KPI perspective will be compliance, or a better word would be adoption of the system. If nobody's going to use it, then it's not going to give them what they need. Now, fair enough, adoption is a KPI or a good KPI to focus on across the board, regardless of what they need. But other industries might be thinking, do you know what? We've got a lot of tail spend, so we need better control and visibility of what's going on in the procurement team. So we've got a really big procurement team. And actually, this kind of manual individual process of figuring out what everybody's up to is not working from a leadership and a decision-making process. So for them, it might be control and visibility of just workflows and projects and spend under management. Others, it might be savings delivered, but you'd argue you don't really need tech to report how much savings you've delivered. So it does mean different things. I think it comes back to the problem that's being solved or the added value that's needed. And then you can work it back there and set the KPIs so that actually, once implemented several months down the line, you can actually say, do you know what? Is it working? And then I think you and I both know there's a lot of challenges out there where people have spent a lot of money on tech and it's not paying dividends.
Yeah, and that's a really good point because we often, and you see it all over LinkedIn around procurement often being quite an undervalued profession, or it can often feel quite unrelenting or a bit of a thankless role in certain organizations, whereas sales, are often praised bringing in the deals, whereas procurement tends to just go about what they do quietly. Is that because the wider organization doesn't understand what we do? And I mean, and I'll be the first to admit that's probably our fault for not communicating it. Or do you just think that it's a more deeper problem from what you see, that procurement professionals still have that mindset that they're the spend police?
It's a bit of both, isn't it? Gosh, that's a real consultancy response, isn't it? It depends. So I think a lot comes down to procurement leader, their experience, and really what they've been brought in to do versus perhaps what they're capable of and what they expect to do. A lot of people talk about seat at the table, don't they? And various things there and who that role reports into. Perhaps if they're not a board member, does it report to CFO, has an impact as well. So there's a few things there. There's a legacy problem as well that perhaps needs to be addressed. There's a few things, but I'm sort of the advocate of, if you have a big plan, make sure that you've got sort of short-term delivery as well as long-term building. So what that would mean is, as part of that plan, start to show value to the right stakeholders, not all, but some stakeholders, build some supporters, endorsers, or ambassadors, you might call them, build them, and then they will help you push with everyone else further down the line. And then with everybody else, including the ones that might not be net promoters, I guess that's a term often used in businesses these days, net promoter score and things like that. I would argue you need to start building those relationships early. Don't think that you can just come to them later down the line. So start to sow the seeds and build that from there. And I guess, bringing it back to technology then, when you then go to source and implement a piece of technology, people are all already receptive. Receptive doesn't mean they'll adopt it, but it means they'll at least listen to you if you've got value to offer them. I think we naturally assume stakeholders will just automatically be receptive and therefore just get bowled over by the tech, but they just won't. They won't. So I think there's a broader piece there around the people piece and, sowing those seeds and building those relationships and paving the way for your technology solution. But then obviously the right training and embedding and change management as well.
And what you just said goes back to the whole ROI piece, doesn't it? That if you don't have good relationships with your stakeholders, you're less likely then to get user adoption, and then you're not going to get ultimately the return on investment. But it's broader than that, isn't it? Because if we look at it from a people factor perspective of headcount and wage bill and employee retention within procurement, you touched on stakeholder engagement and respect from the business has been one important factor around why do people leave or what gives people job satisfaction. But the other part is then if you have the right tech platform, that can then give you the ROI in terms of keeping your employees because they're doing more interesting work, but also the economic value of freeing up their time to be able to deliver more added value, right? Because if they're chasing around with paper or chasing around trying to get different systems to speak to each other and doing data entry because the different tech platforms don't speak to one another, that's not value added work for someone that's on, in some cases, a 6-figure salary.
I completely agree. You've got two factors here, haven't you? You've got, well, I guess two dimensions to it. One is your team and the team you're leading and enabling them and making life easier for them and then retaining them, especially if they're great people. And the other one is the frustration with stakeholders. So whilst you can be fixing one, it might be great for the team to use, but it's just horrific for users. And when I say users, I mean stakeholders and even suppliers in some cases, because by the way, suppliers just get overlooked quite regularly. They often have to be adopters of the system in many cases. And then you've got another problem then, which is, all those savings initiatives you've got in your pipeline, good luck delivering any of them because you've wound up your main stakeholder, IT, telling them that they've got to go jump through hoops to upload something into a system, right? So you're actually potentially even detrimenting your other delivery that you did have. So this is why it's got to be a really thought out process, hasn't it? And add value.
So let's go along with then, you're a decent sized company. You've got, by way of a miracle, your CFO to give you a budget for some tech. So let's just go with an established brand source to pay solution and get one of the big consultancies to go ahead and implement it. Talk to me why that's not a good approach.
Oh, it's just lazy, isn't it, really? It's really lazy. I think, and we all know, particularly in private sector, that you can shape a tender to your needs and to what you want. But ultimately, if your shortlist is going to just include, a certain corner of the magic quadrant, then you're always going to end up with a similar sort of result. And that might work for some companies, but what you're doing is you're automatically spending a significant, and you might think that's what you're going to spend, but actually, that's just a bit in the middle. Stuff around the outsides is all, charged on a T&M basis and broader implementation costs, and we need contractors and consultants to wrap around, and they're not doing a job, so I need some other guru to come in and tell them off, and I'll pay them on a nice day rate as well, which you probably get within that program and IT tech space. So it becomes a much bigger piece. I mean, my view is you bring it back to what's the need, and you go out to the market with an unbiased view about what can provide it for you. And if you have any concerns about credibility, well, you can go to things like your website and vet the right companies and filter them out for the right needs you have. But also you can do your due diligence properly, figure out who you want to use. And then most importantly, if you think, wow, that's 25% of what I was expecting to pay, just be prepared that actually you can then probably invest in the people piece and the process piece around it, which is source it well, get support with that, implement it well, get support with that, embed it well, get support with that, and then all the way through the journey. So that program management piece. And that's not a sales pitch for working with a Procure4. It could be any consultancy or even some good contractors out there. But the ultimate point being is you've got some budget then to play with to get it right. It might be also development. You might need to, not take it off the shelf and develop it a bit. That'll cost as well. So yeah, I think people need to stay open-minded and not just go, we're a big company, big budget. Let's just go for a big provider.
And it rattles me sometimes. I completely agree with you, by the way. It rattles me sometimes that heads of procurement or directors of procurement are often so commercially illiterate that they just give a digital transformation project to a category manager as what they call a development opportunity, which is basically just dumping extra workload on them, instead of just hiring a really talented interim manager in that space to help show them the ropes. Because that category manager is just going to be completely stressed and doing it on top of their existing workload. And bringing in a consultancy then to clean up the mess is just a lack of having the foresight to give someone the tools that they need to do their job. It's setting the whole thing up for failure, isn't it? And you think of the cost of some of these big consultancies. And you're right, you touched on how they earn a lot of money through time and materials if they're implementing their preferred partner solution. And I was at a conference last year in Germany, and I happened to be at the speaker dinner on speaking to a consultancy that does implementation, one of these big source-to-pay platforms. And one of their principals openly told me that one of the reasons why they partner with that company is because it takes quite a long time to implement it, and there's a lot of customization. And I'm not saying that particular solution is inherently a bad solution. No, it's a market-leading solution. They're good at what they do, but the consultancies have a vested interest to sell that solution because their business model is selling bums on seats at an hourly or a daily rate. And, we both come from this from a different angle. I do the upstream part of helping companies to identify and understand what's out there on the market, both through the website as a free of charge resource, but also if someone wants a more white glove approach, I can walk them through it and give them an RFI as a service blueprint at the end of it with the 3 or 4 solutions that I believe they should speak to based on the criteria that they've given me. But I don't do implementation because immediately then I have a conflict of interest. Whereas, and to your point as well, you do implementation as part of your offerings as a consultancy, but you're solution agnostic, similar thing, right? Because otherwise you could be skewed towards going down one direction.
I think going back to your point around the leader piece, just sort of how this ends up being this way. And you're right, if we did a sample survey on programs that have spent money on change management, we asked, how many of those organizations brought in consultants or contractors to try and remedy or improve the pace of a program, I reckon a lot of hands would go up.
Yeah.
There'd be quite a lot of yeses. It just shows, just how poorly planned these can be. But, even in the best case situation, there's a bit of that, but there's too much of it, I think. And I think it comes back to sometimes with the leaders. I mean, you've got to keep in mind that technology companies invest a lot in sales. So they are throwing high-tech information at procurement leaders and CFOs and whoever else regularly, impressing them. There's a lot of cool tools, visuals and things like that. So they do a good job of it. So it's easy to get swayed down a certain route, but you've got to realize that most procurement leaders have usually come up through one aspect of the procurement function. Some of them have dabbled in lots of different areas. I've worked in lots of different areas, but I'll admit as well, because there's no really ego here. There's gaps in my knowledge on certain categories, on certain sectors. So if I was back in leading a function and I recognize those gaps, I would go source help in that area, but not everybody does that. So then you're right. What they naturally do is they know the task at hand. They don't go around the right process to do it. And they give it as a side of desk job for somebody in the business, which is one, because you need a doer, but 2, because it removes a degree of accountability for it as well in some cases. So yeah, unfortunately, that is the case. And that's one of the biggest challenges we've got in consulting. It's trying to show people that they need help when they do, but they won't necessarily admit it, or they can't see the wood from the trees. And it can be very competitive as well. I think people need to understand that actually, if people keep value and return on investment in mind, Procure4, for example, is a great solution. It's only when they think of just the cost and then the fact their immediate budget says they haven't got anything to spend. Well, I think then you'd argue you shouldn't be getting technology in any case anyway. So you've got to stay open-minded, I think, and that's what we ask of leaders, and also think about it as far in advance as possible. Do the right sort of planning. Use the websites like yourselves and your experience, and us as early as possible, for example.
I've talked a lot on previous episodes around things to look for when it comes to sourcing a provider to ensure that you get return on investment for the tech that you're buying. Ease and speed of implementation, user experience, ease of use, being aware of whether it's a license-based pricing or an enterprise price-based pricing are probably the biggest ones. let's dive in a little bit more to some of the potential banana skins during implementation. So talk to me a little bit around what are the things that can typically trip you up during implementation that can have an impact on ROI. Because to be fair to the software companies, if a client is unprepared, it might not always be their fault if they don't have a successful implementation.
True. Yeah, very true. I think I always use the phrase when I deliver training, whether it be contract management or supply management or even negotiation stuff, it takes two to tango. I think there is a mutuality there, particularly from a communication perspective and managing expectations. So yeah, and interdependencies, of course. So I agree there. It isn't always one-sided. But let's pick on the word communication. So firstly, there should be good initial communication about the business need to the business, because these systems will all need stakeholder adoption. So people need to be bought into the idea first that we need to automate. So what are we doing that for? We are automating perhaps sourcing and workflow, because what we need to do is we've got a lot of activity across the team. The team's growing. We're trying to get more spend under control. There's risk there. We need to deliver more savings. The only way the team can do it is be more strategic and take more control. Those sorts of things. There's a bit of communication early stages with stakeholders, managing expectations that they will be onboarded in waves, for example. I think operating in waves is a good idea because it allows you to do that whole sprint and reflection piece, a bit of agile methodology, and learn from that as you go a little bit. And then also win some people over in phases and help them, help you with the following phases. There's a few things there. The training is essential. And interestingly, I've spoken to more people recently about a certain provider of technology and one I've implemented globally in the past before I was a consultant. Actually, in my early stages of my consulting career, years ago, and they are still sort of delivering in this sort of monotone style, 1 hour of just talking at you. And I'm there thinking, that's just not going to stick. That is not going to stick. People aren't going to get it. It's a waste of people's time. And it's going to put them off. So the training and the way it's embedded and the way it's delivered is key. We like to do quick reference guides and things like that as well to supplement the training. So you've kind of got a quick go-to. And then drop-ins and things like that. God, there's so many different... Oh, and the other one would be, so that's a big on the people side and the change management. The other one would be the process. So as you'll know, most technology is trying to automate processes, either trying to make things faster or it's trying to make things more visible and report from that process better. So therefore, the process is really key. If you've got a terrible process that you're trying to automate in the first place, you should be looking to fix that. And then I think you and I had a conversation about this. Then the challenge is also, well, what about if the process is set in the technology you're buying and is pretty set in the market? What is the process then to go from your process to the one that you should be doing? And don't assume it's as simple as switching a technology on, because it never is. There's a lot of mapping, a lot of change around that as well. So people underestimate just exactly what's involved with these things and how long it'll take.
Yeah, I can't remember where I heard this quote from, but it was, if you digitize a crap process, then you get a crappy digital process. And It's very, very true, isn't it? You can't adapt a bad process into technology. You have to rethink it from the beginning in terms of how does the technology change or simplify the process potentially. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I'll mind my language and use the word rubbish. Rubbish in, rubbish out.
Yeah.
Is half the challenge, isn't it, really? Or the sausage machine, isn't it? So there you go.
You didn't touch on data, so talk to me a little bit about how data comes into this in terms of the pre-work that needs to be done around things like data cleansing and taxonomies and that type of thing before, if we're talking more around source to pay here and what needs to be done there, because that really needs to be part of the overall budget, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I mean, we do a lot of this sort of stuff outside of technology. So we'll help clients to assess opportunities to save money and reduce cost and optimize their supply chain. And one of the first things we'll do is an opportunity assessment or a bit of scoping. Part of that on the data side, we have our own taxonomy. So we take their AP, their spend data, so we can take it from multiple sources. And we ask them for a minimum sort of things. It could be invoice line level or at least supplier level data for, say, 12 months of spend. and we'll ask them for the GL code descriptions and things like that. And that allows us then to map that into our taxonomy of area and categorization. But we will also, if they've got their own, we'll do a bit of accommodation in areas because there might be certain sector or industry nuances in terms of how things are phrased. If you think about the insurance sector, it could be around how money is sort of transferred through the business, and is it really spent in a certain way, and what is it called? Is it a supply chain? Is it pass through costs? So those have impact on that taxonomy piece. But we do have our own, which means we can do it quite quickly. And I think that's really key because, for the smaller organizations, they don't have that. Half the challenges don't have control. And it's because often without that taxonomy and guidance, they've got people inputting invoices into any code they can find, basically, any GL or whatever it is.
People will take the easiest path, won't they, in terms of selecting material groups or GL codes or anything like that, especially pre-text purchase orders being the obvious one. Yeah. So, Oliver, we've spoken then about ROI when it comes to selecting a provider, and then during the implementation piece. There's obviously then at the end of the hypercare and the implementation, there's then a handover process when you or any other consultancy for that matter transitions out of the client and hands over the software to them. How do you ensure then that they continue to deploy the good practices that you've taught them, and they ensure that they maintain their user adoption and are able to grow and sort of build on what you've done for them?
Yeah, that's a really good point, isn't it? And there's a lot of questions. I mean, I've been part of programs before when hypercare really hasn't been hypercare. Been a bit of a rush process at the end that's been labeled as hypercare because everything's running behind. And for me, I think that's hypercare in itself, isn't it? There's a few different things. So I think there's things like drop-in sessions. There's all the quick reference guides you need. Training is completed. Follow-up feedback sessions have happened, just to see if there's any other outstanding challenges or issues with people. And then you're quite open about the fact that people can have a super user to contact. So all the doors are open, the communication channels are there, governance is set up to sort of have more further drop-in sessions for people. And you've got an appointed person in the procurement team who makes time available to support individuals as well. But I think the other thing is during hypercare, you need to get that reporting right so you can start to see adoption. What you can't do is roll off hypercare and then go, right, we've switched our reporting on, and then you realize on day hypercare +1 that actually nobody's using the system. No, people should be using it in hypercare. Otherwise, it's not really care because you're not really caring for them because you haven't tried it.
Yeah.
Haven't used it yet. So hypercare is not just the training. It's got to be alive for me. Even if it's a soft launch, it's got to be almost a live environment with usage, with utilization. And I think you might even have to, push some buttons in hypercare and challenge people to do some things and just test it, because then at least you get the negative feedback out. Better to know a problem than to have it just pushed under the rug and people just go, yeah, we'll see you later. We'll adopt it. Yeah, no problem. And they don't. So that's my general takeaway from that.
Yeah, and going through a generic training and then not actually ensuring that people have logged in and can use it and do specific use cases in it. So like with anything, isn't it? Half of it is just using it practically on the job, because everyone goes on training courses and forgets what they've learned. It's just a fact of life, isn't it? Especially if they're online and you're getting distracted with your phone. Yeah. So just conscious of the time, Oliver, and looking to start to wrap this up, I'm going to ask you the question. I deliberately left this to the end. Normally, I ask guests this at the beginning, but I've deliberately left this one to the end. So you're a head of procurement in a mid-market business, and by way of a miracle, you've convinced your CFO to give you a budget to invest in some procurement technology. What would you go out and buy first?
Yeah, we've had a bit of conversation about this before, haven't we? So I know what you lean towards, which I don't disagree with, but I'm sort of a little bit old school, really. Contract management space, so contract repository. But repository just sounds like a dumping ground, doesn't it? And that's not what I mean. I think you've got to see the value in this. So if the repository also has good record keeping and has the ability to talk to your Outlook and prompt on notifications and expiries, then you've got basically a system that is for the entire business, firstly, not just procurement. So it's where contracts are stored and saved. But also it talks to the procurement function, creating a pipeline of activity, regardless of what your strategy says. You've got a minimum expectation that you need to renew and renegotiate contracts. You've naturally got insight from that. You overlay some spend on top of that, which you can do. And you've naturally then got spend under management. You've got a view of what isn't under management and therefore a view of risk. And there's just so many different benefits really to that. And also it's probably at the cheap, I mean, you'll know more, but it's probably at the cheaper end of the spectrum to have a sort of a contract database, as a better word might be. So yeah, I'm a big advocate for that because I feel like procurement's a cycle and that really appeals to a lot of different phases and stages in the procurement cycle.
Yeah, no, and yeah, I mean, we've had this debate before, and I would always pick spend analysts, but I can you make a good case for it, absolutely, and you are right that even you could almost build a contract repository using generic no-code apps, and yes, it's not going to be as good as specifically built piece of software that focuses on that. But if you're really up against it and you don't have much budget, you could build up a basic contracts repository that can send push notifications without needing. I could even do it myself. So yeah, it's a very good point. And it is vitally important. I still, should you know what you're spending before you implement a contract repository, there's always a case for and against that. But yeah, you've got to know what contracts you've got in place and where you could get tripped up. And auto renewals of contracts that you don't know about cost the business money, 100%.
It's also because of Procure4 will take your AP data and we don't need technology to build a sort of a Power BI dashboard or whatever it is to and apply a taxonomy to figure out all the areas of spending. And then we obviously use 20 years of data modeling to basically highlight what the opportunities are against those categories as well. So I guess I'm so used to having that capability in-house that you could argue, we can build that as well. In the same way you say you can build the workflow around the contract database, we can build that. But I think both those things are gold, absolute gold.
Yeah.
Those two things.
Agreed. So finally, quick fire round, Oliver. If you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be?
I like France. That doesn't seem too far away, but with the global warming, it'll probably get hotter and hotter. Plus I can ski. I can ski in France, which I quite like to do times. I can sunbathe. I can drink the nice wine, quite like a glass of Santerre, cheese, food, rugby. So actually, I think that would be definitely up there somewhere, but you put me on the spot.
Okay, yeah. And then finally, and you've got to keep this one clean, what's your favourite guilty pleasure?
Oh dear. I know what my partner Amy would say. It's a Greg's bacon and sausage roll in the morning with brown sauce, I think, and sour sweet. They're terrible for my teeth, but I absolutely love fizzy sour sweets. Okay.
Like those little cola bottles that we used to get when we were kids? Or?
Oh, worse than that. It's more sour, like fizzy belts. But
okay.
So there you go. There's the PG version.
Interesting answers. So finally, before we close off, if any listeners would like to learn more about what you do or would maybe just like to connect and have a quick chat with you, where's the best place that we can send them?
Yeah, follow, connect with me on LinkedIn, follow Procure4. That'd be great. And just drop me a message and happy to have a chat and see how we can perhaps support even beyond technology.
Fantastic. Always great catching up with you, Oliver, and pleasure to talk to you. For everyone that's listening, that was Oliver from Procure4 talking about ROI on procurement tech, just beyond selecting a solution throughout the implementation phase and hypercare and beyond. If you like what you hear on this podcast, there are lots of others out there. So I'm especially grateful that you've chosen to put us into your earbuds today. And do go and like us or follow us or subscribe to us where you listen to your podcasts so as we can reach more people. We will catch you again at the same time next week. Until then, thank you for listening and bye for now.